So I just want to firstly thank everybody for coming. This event, How to Support Your Team Members Through Personal Crisis, came from two polls that we ran, where we were basically looking for things that HR maybe or HR managers, employers wanted to learn a little bit more about, have a bit more of a toolkit when it came to dealing with one particular problem. And this was the thing on both polls that kind of rose to the top. So that shows me that we want to help people who are experiencing some form of personal crisis, and maybe we don't necessarily feel completely comfortable at times. So today, I have a couple of amazing guests with me. Before I introduce them, or before they introduce themselves, I'll do a quick intro from me for those that don't know me. My name is Jamie Humphrey. I'm the founder of a company called Reachus, which provides mental health support to organizations. And also, before we start, I will just say if everybody could go onto mute, I think they have. If there's anything that you would like to share or ask the team, feel free to pop it in the chat or do that little wavy hand thing that you can do on Zoom. Either or, I'll make sure to bring you into the conversation. Towards the end, we're going to have a little bit of an open discussion anyway, if there are any questions. So first of all, Danny boy, would you mind
So,
giving everybody a quick intro and explain who you are and who you help?
sure, yeah. I'm Daniel Glyde. I am a peak performance coach. I'm part of two businesses. So I run a coaching business where I work with men, busy professionals, business owners, leaders, entrepreneurs, and I run a mastermind group for those men too. And I'm part of another business called Tribe Fortune, where we're a holistic well-being business. We work with companies and corporations as well as run bespoke well-being retreats. And I'm also a listening volunteer with the Samaritans. So I spend 3 hours every week listening to and dealing with people in crisis. I have a bit of experience with that.
That's awesome. As someone who's used the Samaritan's line because of that exact reason, I really appreciate people like you being on there and offering your time to do it. So also we have the fabulous Leanne Weaver. Leanne, do you want to give everyone a quick intro into who you are and what you do?
Absolutely, thank you. Hi everyone, it's really lovely to be here. So I'm Leanne Weaver. I am the managing director of a company called Beam Development and Training. And Beam Training deliver leadership, well-being, and personal development training in organizations in 45 plus countries, 45 when we last counted. So we work with all sorts of organizations doing workshops and training courses on anything from stress to leadership to confidence to imposter syndrome. And I am also a partner in another company called Beam Therapy, as I've been a therapist for 14 years, working with individuals and organizations, actually support a lot of organizations too, on a whole range of problems and challenges. So technically, I'm what's called a therapeutic coach. So have background in psychology, neuropsychology, and then lots of different therapy qualifications, but I also have coaching qualifications as well. So I tend to describe the work that I do as like water, right? So you can have water to put out a fire, that's therapy, or you can have water to water a seed and grow a plant, that's coaching. That's me in a nutshell.
Fabulous. So basically, I've got two of the best people I could possibly have for this subject. I'm very grateful to you both for giving your time. So we're going to talk a little bit about personal crisis today. And we had a conversation yesterday, the three of us, about what that kind of entails, what it means. I think that it would be helpful at the beginning for us to be able to cover maybe a few of the circumstances that an employee might be experiencing. So, Dan, I'm going to shoot this to you, mate. Things that fall outside, I guess, of the spectrum of work. Some of the things that could be included when we talk about personal crisis.
So, significant loss in somebody's life. That could be their partner's lost their job. That could be they've lost a child, they've lost a parent, they've lost a loved one. Financial crises where people are struggling because they've got in debt, because of higher costs, because of unforeseen circumstances. So many different things happen, don't they? Emotional crises. People have those regularly where they've kind of hit a rock bottom, I guess, and they've got nothing else to give. People become isolated and lonely, particularly men, because we often put a front out to the world and false bravado and hide behind the "I'm fine." Um, I mean, there's so many things, Jamie, aren't there? Life is full of unforeseen circumstances, curveballs, things nobody saw coming, things didn't people didn't expect to have in their lives or to have to deal with. Getting some sort of a diagnosis that you have a health problem, whether that's mental or physical. That can often lead to people into crisis because suddenly their future, they feel like the rug's been pulled out from under them, and their future is all up in the air. Anything that makes people feel uncertain or fearful can send them into crisis. Just trying to think if there's any other areas of crisis that people have. They're the ones I can think of off the top of my head, mate.
I think you've covered plenty, and you made a good point. And also, I think one of the things that we touched on yesterday is that the crisis doesn't need to have happened recently. It could have happened a long time ago, and it's just only really catching up with the person
Yeah,
now.
well, crises tend to happen incrementally, right? There's a series of
Yeah,
steps that get us there. So quite often it won't be just one thing. The one thing will be the straw that broke the camel's back.
yeah, exactly. Leanne, one of the things that you picked up on when we were chatting yesterday was that when I created this event, I was thinking more of personal crisis outside of work, but you mentioned that there are examples of moments where it could happen in work. Do you want to share those?
Absolutely. I mean, I completely agree with everything Dan said there, but it can be, a change in your work circumstance. It can be that you're really struggling to get on with someone that you're working with, and that's just making work more and more difficult. It can be stress and burnout, which definitely see a lot of. But there's also some careers that are kind of crisis facing. And some organizations are great at taking responsibility for that. So I know kind of historically the railways are pretty good. So here it's Transport for Wales, but all the railway organizations, they recognize that there's potentially a chance where a train driver might end up taking someone's life just through doing their job. And they're generally supported really well. Immediate leave, as much counselling as they need, lots of emotional support. But I was talking to Jamie and Dan about an experience I had in supporting a police officer who actually worked on Transport Police and had been asked to go, and I don't want to get too graphic here. So essentially, a young person had been hit by a train and they had to kind of clean up what had happened. They then also had to be involved with informing the family. And as soon as they left that family's house, they had the next call and they were expected to go and show up. And I think the starkness of the difference between how that train driver was treated compared to the officer was really quite brutal, because that's a profession that we know will be facing challenge and crisis constantly, but there is an expectation that that's what they're trained for and they just shrug it off and carry on. But ultimately, we're all human beings. We all have those things that really get to us, those challenges that really hit us, and I think we could do better.
Absolutely. I think Jill's made a great point as well. It doesn't necessarily need to be our crisis. It could be the crisis of someone that we love, someone that we're very, very close to. So what I want to talk about now is how that manifests, because it's kind of, we should want to help our colleagues and our subordinates and the people that we work with, but often there needs to be an extra motivation there, an extra layer. And I think that if somebody is really affected and they're just not showing up on the day to day, what are some of the things that we might recognize in a colleague or anyone at work that is going through a personal crisis, Leanne?
So there absolutely can be that defining moment. They've had a sudden bereavement. That's kind of clear as the colleagues for us to recognize and see. But as you and Dan rightly said, that, a lot of our crises are actually an incremental build-up of things that eventually take us to that breaking point. And in therapy, I always describe that, people will say to me things like, oh, I just developed burnout out of the blue, or I had a breakdown out of the blue. These never happen out of the blue. And the analogy I always use is it's like driving a car. So in the beginning, we might just notice a bit of a weird noise, but we carry on driving. Then we might get an amber light come up on the dashboard, which means we can keep driving, but we really need to deal with it. And then if we don't deal with that, we'll get a red light, and then it's kind of the car brakes. And so I believe that we've all got the signs of the knocking noise and the amber light. It's whether we pay attention as individuals and see that in ourselves. And then when we're looking after people in any kind of context, it's kind of recognizing those amber lights in other people. So, if we talk about burnout is never an overnight thing. Burnout happens over usually months, sometimes years. And people who have burnout generally are high achievers. They are very keen to do well and to please other people. And so they are likely to be really showing up at work, like really present, doing long hours. But maybe you notice actually they're not producing as much. Or maybe they're snapping and their mood is a little bit more irritable. Or maybe they just like by 10 a.m. they look exhausted as if they've done a full day's work already. They're what I would call that amber lights. There's a lot if we look at burnout, because actually that's a crisis that I believe is really far-reaching in organizations right now. When I talk about burnout, there are several common amber lights. So however you're experiencing burnout, these tend to show up in everyone. So one is that you're doing more than ever, but producing less. One is that you just start to feel like you don't care as much. So you kind of get emotional fatigue. Someone's telling you about, I don't know, an argument they've had with their partner, and I just haven't got the energy for this. Another one is decision fatigue. So we've probably all had those experiences where you've had a really stressful day and you go to the supermarket to get something to eat that evening, and you stand there and you can't remember a single meal you've ever made, a single meal you've ever enjoyed, and you're just looking at the food thinking, I don't know what to have. That's decision fatigue. That if we consistently get that, that's definitely an amber light. And then just kind of a sensitivity to what I would call cognitive load. So it's like, I can't take any more in. So in individuals, what that can sometimes look like is being irritated by someone having a conversation next to you. And it's just too much. I just can't take it. Someone's got their music playing. I can't handle that. It's like I'm sensory overloaded. So I think in ourselves, we need to get much better at recognizing those amber lights, because when we do, we can then recognize those in other people as well. So we don't have to wait until we see the red light.
That's great. I feel like I'm having a scary epiphany because some of those amber lights are popping up.
Most of us have probably got some amber lights on a lot of the time, right?
Okay, let's hope they switch off. I think that what I've taken from that mainly is that if you notice a distinct difference in the way someone is either behaving or presenting, then that could be an amber light.
Definitely. And that isn't necessarily that they're presenting as super stressed. They're not necessarily crying in the corner. That's kind of really obvious for us to deal with. It could be they're excessively people pleasing. We did a session on stress a long time ago, Jamie. People pleasing is a stress response. Did you remember?
Yeah.
So if someone's people pleasing, what they're showing is they're stressed. It's not necessarily the person who's crying in the corner or looking disheveled or looking like they're dealing with something. It's the person who's putting on the happy smiley face all the time that can be flickering a lot of amber lights as well.
Yeah, I mean, Richard Gofty has put a really good point as well. That burnout can be so progressive that sometimes we don't recognize it in ourselves, and then we see a picture of ourselves from a couple of years ago, and we can't believe the difference. So it's definitely something that I've experienced. Dan, one thing that I'm noting here when I'm thinking back to times where I've experienced personal crisis, that I've behaved very differently on different occasions. There's been occasions where I've been very silent, and there's been occasions where I've been very loud. Is that something that you have noticed in the people that you've worked with?
Yeah, and it's definitely the same as me, Jamie. I burnt out in my previous career, because I was trying to do so much, and I became a people pleaser because I thought that's how I would get ahead, and that was one of the things that burnt me out. But you could, I would tend to react to a crisis or not feeling myself or not feeling right in one of two ways. I would either withdraw and go quiet, or I would get on the front foot with that classic male false bravado, false confidence, and pretending. And I became very adept at pretending. And so it can be really tough to spot these things in other people. And there might just be really small signs of a slight change in behavior. Are they suddenly drinking a load more coffee in the afternoon where they didn't before? Are they always going to the pub after work where they didn't before? Are they avoiding certain things? Avoidance was a classic one for me, Jamie. That's what I would do all the time. Was suddenly I would avoid situations, I would avoid people, I would keep myself away from things because I knew it might trigger me. And yeah, that what Leanne touched on there, that kind of that irritability, that frustration. You know, if people are, especially people who don't normally get easily frustrated and irritated, that's a clear sign that there's something probably bubbling along under the surface. And in ourselves, it's those physical signs, Jamie. The things I ignored for years was bad digestion. I had bad skin. I was overweight despite being a very active, very physically active person. And the short fuse. I would be losing my temper with my wife or with my son or with people around me, and just getting triggered by everything. I'd get in the car in the morning, and by the time I got to work, I was so full of rage that all my energy for the day had gone because I'm on the road going, why is he hogging the middle lane? What are you doing? And what a way to set yourself up for the day. So, and again, I think Leanne touched on it. If someone's arriving to work already exhausted, there's something going on.
Yeah.
Yes, I think one of the things to recognize is all of us, when we feel any discomfort, our desire is to get back into a comfortable state as quickly as possible. And so if we feel discomfort from stress, sadness, whatever that uncomfortable emotion is that we're carrying, we will resort to coping mechanisms. And coping mechanisms sit under three categories. So we can have good coping mechanisms, right? Going talking to a counselor or a therapist, doing yoga, going for a long walk in nature. The things that we know intuitively, like this isn't rocket science, we know that they're good for us. And then we have other coping mechanisms. So we have ones which are always bad, which are anesthetic techniques. So that's where we're struggling so much that we will go to anything that will quickly and usually chemically change our emotional state. So the obvious one is drinking alcohol, but it could be smoking, it could be gorging on food, it could be things like gambling as well, just to get that quick hit that changes our state. Sort of inappropriate sexual relations as well, anything that kind of takes us into another chemical state as quickly as possible. Anesthetic techniques are always harmful because they will quickly change our state, and then we'll crash lower than where we started, and then we need a bigger hit next time. So, it's really spikes. And then the third coping mechanism style is a little bit more gray. And this is what Dan was touching on, is kind of this avoidance, right? So the third coping mechanism is called distraction techniques. And as a therapist, there are times where I absolutely encourage clients to use distraction. Okay, so we all know personally, say you're having a really tough time at home. Actually, sometimes going into work is the best thing you can do for your mental health. It's like, I can just focus on work. And a lot of distraction techniques are positive. Like exercise is an incredible distraction technique. Cleaning the house for some people is a distraction technique. There's loads of different ones. But the problem with a distraction technique is it's healthy until it becomes avoidance. And that's what Dan was talking about. So if I am cleaning the house and it's helped me forget about an argument I've had with my in-law, brilliant, right? But if I'm up till 3 a.m. every night of the week trying to clean my house, which I've worked with clients who do that, absolutely not a healthy coping mechanism. If I go for a run because it helps me burn off that kind of excess adrenaline and cortisol, amazing. If I'm going for 6 runs a day, again, an actual client I've worked with, then that is not healthy. That's avoidance. And so the anesthetic techniques are really easy for us to spot if we know that person. We can see they're engaging in unhealthy behaviors. The avoidance techniques are a little bit, we've got to be a little bit more aware of, hang on a minute, that's perhaps going into the excessive, becoming more of an avoidance tool rather than a coping mechanism. So again, I think we need to be better at seeing this in ourselves, because the more we see this in ourselves, the more we're going to recognize it in other people as well. And then recognizing it in those people around us and just being like, whew, you're going to the gym a lot at the moment. Are you preparing for anything? Is there something you're working on? Or, and try and have that dialogue and that conversation that offers support.
I think that's very, very useful. I think we've kind of sort of covered, I guess, some of the things that we could maybe notice. And the next stage is, what do we do about it? So we've noticed that somebody in our workspace or even in our personal life is potentially going through some form of crisis because of these signs that we've recognized, these orange lights. How do we lean into that, Leanne? What is an appropriate way to approach it?
So it's relationship dependent. So we need to recognize that the conversation I'd have with my husband or my best friend is very different to a conversation I'd have with a colleague. So we have to respect boundaries that already exist, like absolutely. But a kind of rule of thumb is be as direct as you possibly can. Like we have a tendency, and it's quite a British thing as well, for sure, to like kind of dance around it. Oh, are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. Okay, brill, fab. The person sat crying, but they've said they're okay, so I've done my bit. We don't want to do that. If anyone's even done the mental health first aider training, a key part of that training is you ask a direct question. Like, definitely as a therapist, it's my job to sometimes say, are you having any suicidal thoughts? It's an uncomfortable question. Of course it is. But actually, if I don't ask that question, and I think is really relevant, that person is just waiting to be heard and nobody hears them. And so not being afraid to say words, you haven't seemed quite yourself lately. Like, is it the stress of work or is there something else going on? Being direct, asking open questions, not, you doing all right? Because all of us will just give our stock response to that. Yeah, great. Yeah, I'm fine. To ask open questions like, oh, what's been going on with you lately? How's things at home? Or are you still planning a holiday? Whatever it is, to start to build up that rapport and that trust, and then to not be afraid of having that difficult interaction.
I don't know why. It might be that I see potentially people having a very soft approach all the time, but I didn't think that necessarily would be your answer. So I think that's fantastic that you said that. Dan, does tone matter when we're having these conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything matters. How you say it, what you say, where you say it, when you say it, all of that matters. It all needs to be appropriate. And, Leanne is exactly right. You can't dance around it because you won't get a straight answer. You've got to tell them this is the behavior I've noticed, and I've noticed this is unusual for you. And Leanne's right. Ask a big open question. And then the key, listen. Not to respond. Don't give well-meaning advice. Don't do the sympathy tilt of the head. Oh, isn't that horrible? No, nobody wants that or needs that. Listen. Listen actively. Listen to what they're really telling you. Listen to what they're not telling you, the bit between the lines. because then then you get to respond, right? Rather than don't be sharing relatable stories. Oh yeah, this happened to me as well. It's like, no, that's not what this conversation is about. And that's how you're going to build trust and rapport, by really hearing someone, really hearing what they're saying. And the chances are you're not going to know what to do about that. There is probably, unless you're someone, incredibly qualified like Leanne, you're probably not going to be able to give them advice that helps. So you find out where they can get the help and support that they need. Don't get out of your lane. Don't feel like it's your problem to deal with, especially as an HR professional, right? You've got so much already on your plate. You're not there to be a counselor and a therapist and a coach too. There are lots of things you can signpost people to in terms of charities and maybe even things your organization does. But yeah, the key is to be really aware of where and when you're having this conversation, who it is you're talking to, as Leanne said, the relationship you've got, and to listen. Don't dismiss people. Don't distrust people. Really hear what they're saying and accept their reality. Don't go, oh God, this, oh, is that all it was, right? Because there you go. Trust, rapport broken. They're never going to come to you. They're never going to speak to you again. And they're never going to trust you. So yeah, that I can't emphasize that enough, Jamie, that listening. This is the important bit, that people feel seen and they feel heard.
Got it. Leanne, is there any language that we should avoid?
I think it's relationship and culturally dependent. Like, I only met Dan in real life yesterday, but I'm pretty sure I can say to Dan, like, oh, okay, like, what's really fucking you off right now, Dan? And that's how Dan will respond, right? Whereas if I said that to one of my little old lady clients, probably wouldn't go down well. They'd probably smack me, actually. So, like, we have to first of all be aware of who we're talking to. We have to absolutely agree with Dan, stay in our lane. Like, as my role, I constantly signpost people to a more appropriate avenue. If there's no way that I'm going to jump in, I don't personally deal with addictions, for example, but I can absolutely signpost people to someone who can give really good help for that. So I think it's really important to just not try and be everything. I think as human beings, a lot of us have a tendency of, oh, you're bringing me a problem, so I better fix it. Nobody wants to be fixed because nobody's broken, right? So we don't need to fix it. We can absolutely take that obligation off our shoulders. Jill, you're not alone. So many of us are. But actually, it's not about being fixed. What people want, and I've seen thousands and thousands of people in a crisis, and what people want more than anything is to feel seen, heard, and valued. So sitting there and saying, yeah, that sucks. That sounds shit. That sounds really hard, is actually really valuable in that moment. However, what we don't want to do is constantly kind of stay on the problem. So in therapy is very solution focused. So absolutely, I can sit and I can recognize that bereavement was hard, that relationship was hard. Absolutely. And if you need to tell me every detail of that, it's absolutely fine. However, now what? Because we can't go back and change that bit. And so a question that I use in therapy probably every hour is, now what? And I use it on my own mental health as well. Like, okay, I can have a cry, I can be angry about it, something, I can be upset. Now what? And I think that's really empowering, because when we sit with someone, we're not saying, okay, you do X, Y, and Z and everything will be okay. Because we can't do that. We don't know their life, we don't know their story. But what we can do is say, now what do you want to do today? And I can help you and be there with you while you do it. I think that's so much more empowering. The goal with therapy, for sure, is self-reliance. So I can teach you tools, I can talk you through it, but I want you to be able to do it on your own, not to think I always need therapy to be able to deal with life.
I think you've given some very, very actionable tools there. From where I'm sitting, it sounds like Dad kept saying, "Listen." in an area and an environment and in a language and a tone that is comfortable and supportive, and then talk about what's next. Put the ball in their corner and see where you can move forward to. I think that one thing that's popped up when I've had conversations about this kind of stuff in the past with people in employment is there's a concern that professionalism is going to kind of cross over with, I don't know, something else. It's kind of like, where is that line of being professional, but at the same, being a colleague instead of a friend, or being too much a friend? Do you know what I mean? Dan, is there a way that you would recommend people should navigate that?
I mean, it's tricky, Jamie, isn't it? It's tricky, and I'm not sure I have a really clear and obvious answer for people, because in different organizations are going to be different, and it will depend very much on your workplace culture. But if you can foster a culture where people can talk and share and won't feel stigmatized or judged, or the thing that everybody's always concerned about in these situations is, am I going to be looked upon less here if I open up and admit what's going on for me? Is that going to ruin my prospects of getting on at this company? Am I going to be forever labeled as the person that had this crisis, or this happened or that happened? So I think it's really important that you create an environment where that's not a thing. And I think the real difficulty for HR professionals is they're the hirers and firers as well as the well-being people. So it's really tough, isn't it, for say I'm having a crisis at work. Do I want to go and see the HR person who might fire me in a couple of months' time? So you've got to create the spaces where people can talk openly and honestly without it affecting their career prospects, or how they're viewed and how they're seen. And yeah, you've got to be very aware that you're in a workplace. You've got to be very aware you're representing a company and you're part of an organization. So yeah, you've got to be mindful of that, and with how you help people and how you support people. But at the same time, and Leanne said this, we're all human beings. There isn't one of us that isn't going through something, right? And we spend so much of our time at work. So we need levers and mechanisms and things to happen at work, so we can feel seen and validated and heard, so we can feel supported. And a good way of doing that is by creating advocates within your workforce, so they don't have to go to their line manager and their boss and the HR representative all the time. That there is somebody on their level that they can talk to, because actually they're much more likely to open up peer to peer than they are talking to their boss or their line manager in a place where they might fear being stigmatized. So, as Leanne mentioned, you've got to be really aware of where you are and who you're talking to and why you're doing it. But at the same time, you mustn't let that stop you either from bringing a problem that you need to share with somebody, or from allowing somebody to open up. If you don't feel comfortable, then point somebody else in the right direction. As Leanne said, you say, yeah, do you know what? That sucks. That's awful, isn't it? Let's go and talk to somebody else. Only if they're comfortable, of course, and they want to share it. But, don't take on other people's burdens by yourself, because we've all got plenty enough of those to cope with ourselves. Be a listening ear, be supportive, be compassionate, be empathetic, but don't bite off more than you can chew, right? And be aware you are in a workplace and you are colleagues. So there are boundaries. There are things. There are places you probably shouldn't go, and you'll know that. You'll know that yourself. You'll feel it. So don't get out into things you're not comfortable talking about. Be helpful. Be supportive. Listen, but be prepared to just point people in the other direction. As the answer is, don't try and fix people's problems for them. That's not what they want, and it's not helpful. And actually, you don't really know what's going on for people. You might make an assumption based on something that's happened to you, but we all know about assumptions, Jamie, don't we, and what they do.
We do indeed. We talked about this thing called culture, and this thing keeps coming back every single event I do. It's almost like a running theme, where it's like, you need to create a culture that makes people feel supported. In my experience, one of the things that I think has been really good is when I see some of the more senior staff open up and be honest about when they've experienced some form of mental distress. Leanne, is there anything else that you would add to that? Would you agree that that's probably a great place to start from the top?
So, yes and no. So, I think a lot of there is a lot of talk about culture, and from a well-being perspective, and actually from a healthy, functioning, performing organization perspective, what they are actually talking about is psychological safety. But it's come under this umbrella of culture, which sometimes gets lost in team away days and like, oh, we have a celebration for sales and all of this stuff, which is lovely. But if an organization hasn't established psychological safety, then your employees aren't going to bring their whole selves to work. Your employees are going to create a blame culture because they're scared of speaking up, they're scared of failing, they're scared of being vulnerable. And ultimately, your employees are not going to create the healthiest organization for you. The greatest predictor of a functional team is psychological safety. So if anyone wants to look into it, Google did a 2-year project called Project Aristotle, which was looking at what made a high performing team. And after a lot of failures in trying to work out what it was, it came down to this idea of psychological safety, which is essentially an environment. Amazing, you are on the ball. An environment where people feel safe to be themselves, safe to speak up, safe to make mistakes. Like failure is actually totally okay. And safe to say when they're struggling, when they need help and support. And I was delivering a session on psych safety this week. It's one of our most popular topics at the moment. And the way I always present it is it's so often seen that culture and psych safety needs to be from HR and SLT and then cascaded down. I think that's absolute rubbish because that's not how culture is created. Culture is created in the day-to-day activities, the language that's used, the banter that makes people feel unsafe or not able to be themselves. Psychological safety and culture is every single employee's responsibility. So even if you have an SLT that aren't particularly great on well-being, aren't particularly forward focused, you can still create a team which has a really healthy, positive, open culture where they can be themselves within that space. And I think if all of us took responsibility for that, which is essentially making ourselves vulnerable. So the bit I agree with Jamie is actually admitting to people, whatever level you are in an organization, oh yeah, actually, it's a bit much at the moment. I'm dealing with this, and that doesn't mean making yourself, your whole life out there in public. Not everyone wants that, but it's just being a little bit more human and a bit more honest, and just kind of having that vulnerability, being honest in your conversations, asking about the whole person, not the employee. All of those start to create this lovely ripple of psychological safety, which you just see take over the culture of the organization.
That's actually amazing to hear. I think that there's going to be a lot of people that are going to listen to the recording afterwards. And I think that it's very empowering to say that even if it doesn't necessarily feel like there's too much buy-in up there, you can still create something pretty magical. That's an incredibly empowering thing and not something I've heard much. So thank you so much for that. Leanne, I kind of wanted to pick your brains a little bit. We talk today about staying in your lane and knowing when you can help, when you can't. Dan mentioned that sometimes it is appropriate to pull other colleagues in to continue the conversation. What other resources do most organizations have access to that they could utilize in these situations?
So having mental health first aiders, advocates is really, really common. I do have some concerns about that as well. Generally, in an organization, the people who volunteer to be mental health first aiders do so because they have a personal experience of mental health and aren't necessarily equipped in that moment and sometimes take on too much from the person who's being open with them. So I do have a little concern about someone absolutely putting themselves in that role with really good intent, but maybe they need to be checked on and have the support as well. And then we can look at, I mean, EAPs. Not a huge fan of EAPs. We work with a lot of organizations. All of them probably will say to us that they've got EAPs. And then when we ask for statistics on use, and when we ask people on the office floor, shop floor, what they think of it, how they've used it, it seems more of a tick box experience. And I'm not just saying that because Reach Us is a real alternative to EAPs, but there is a desperate need for an alternative to EAPs.
Let's give you that afterwards. Thank you.
Yeah, just so you all know, this is all part of the plan.
It's almost like we finished on that message.
Yeah, sign up to Reach Us and then bring Beam in to do some corporate training and have Dan in to do some coaching. Sorted.
And then you're sorted. You heard it here first. I mean, I think we've kind of gone through the journey of what personal crisis can look like if it's dealt with very well. From being able to recognize the signs and orange lights that might be occurring, to be able to starting a conversation in a way that is very supportive and empathetic. We've even looked at the broader picture of what is it that we're trying to achieve here? Is it psychological safety? Is it a better culture? Are those two words distinct? Are they the same? I've definitely taken quite a lot away from that in particular. And also, I guess we've kind of touched on the support thing. The thing that I will add to that when it comes to EAPs, and I am not just saying this because of what my company does. I personally think EAP, when it started, was a brilliant thing. The opportunity to give employees access to mental health support is absolutely fantastic. But I would say to organizations that do use an EAP, just be aware that the employees, when they call that number and they reach that first triage, that first level, they might not necessarily reach the support that they need. So it is worth at least following up to check and see whether they did actually receive some form of intervention, or if they were pushed to maybe a self-help resource or pushed away. I've heard a lot of stories about people being pushed away for very, very minor things. Some things quite distressing. I had an HR manager tell me that one of their employees was pushed away because of her autism diagnosis. So I definitely think that they're not necessarily a bad thing, but they require a bit of due diligence if they are used as a resource. Is there anything, Dan, you're an experienced man, you know a lot of stuff. Is there anything that from this discussion that you would call you fellow, is there anything that you would say is a bit of a takeaway? And anyone else who's listened to this event, if you could pop in the comments, if there's any one or two things that you've learned during this conversation. Dan?
Yeah, well, I think that, Leanne kind of touched on it in her last answer there. Personal responsibility. We all have a responsibility to do this. This isn't somebody else's job, right? The culture at where you work is partly your responsibility. How the people feel around you is partly your responsibility. It's about leadership, and leadership starts with you. So it starts with being honest with yourself. And, and I know this particularly with some of the men I work with, we're very good at creating fronts and bravado and pretending and hiding behind the I'm fine. Start with you. Start with admitting when you're going through something. Start with sharing little bits of that with other people. Start making it normal to have those conversations. I've got a WhatsApp group, and it's a men's WhatsApp group, and we're now in a place with that group where it's normal for us all to say, I've gone through something this week. Here's what I did. Here's how I handled it. And there, what that Jill said, be aware not to overshare. So when I was rebuilding myself and my own personal development after I hit burnout, I suddenly became super honest and a massive oversharer because I would just tell everyone everything. And sometimes I would see people's faces or people behind the person I was talking to's face and think, Perhaps this wasn't the appropriate time and place to be telling this story. So do be aware of that. Do be aware, as Leanne mentioned, who you're talking to, where you're talking to them, when you're talking to them. But it, lead the way. If you want to see change in your workplace, lead the way. Don't wait for the leaders to do it. If you want to work in a place that's supportive and caring, lead the way. Be supportive, be caring. But don't take on too much. Keep that balance. But yeah, I think the thing I've really taken away is we can't sit around waiting for our employers, waiting for corporations and businesses to do this and to get this right, or to go and see somebody like Jamie and actually put in a scheme that really does help and support people. Take responsibility, do it yourself. If there's something you want to see, come up with an idea, suggest it to the senior leadership team. They'll probably be delighted to hear it because they've got so much other stuff they'll be dealing with. It's really important that if you feel like this is something that's important, that you do something about it, especially, we're always told, fix the roof while the sun shines. So if you're in a good spot and you're feeling good in your life and everything feels good and you've got energy and you've got clarity and you've got focus, do something good with that. Create something for your colleagues. Create that psychological safety, that normalizing of having conversations of when things don't go well. Because every single human being on the planet has had a crisis, has got something going on. Every one of us is dealing with something. Be aware of that, and particularly in yourself.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dan. Leanne, is there anything from this conversation that you would take away as this is particularly important? This is something that I think that if you're going to take away anything from this, take away this.
Probably the not trying to fix people. I think that if we can kind of get that message out further, then it takes a lot of pressure off you as the person that they're coming to. Instantly is like, I don't have to fix this. It also stops people being so scared of coming to you. We've all had it. We've all had a crisis, a problem, and we've gone and we've finally plucked up the courage to confide in someone. And then they're like, okay, we'll do this. And you're like, I didn't want you to do that. I just wanted you to listen and say it sucks. So I think definitely not trying to fix and just being better listeners, and I just, with all of this stuff in however I work with people, I always say, like, just let it start with you first. Like, it's so easy to look around and see what everyone else is doing wrong, what everyone else should be doing, but start with you first. So, as Dan said, have more honest conversations, admit if you're needing some extra help and support, but also reflect on yourself. Hang on, have I got yellow lights flashing here? Do I need to deal with my stuff before I'm looking around at everyone else thinking they're doing it wrong? And as someone who's, I've lived and breathed this stuff since I was 18, so, about 5 years. I've lived and breathed this stuff for a long time. And I still absolutely have to come back to myself and go, okay, so where am I? What's my baseline? Like, how am I tolerating the stress that I'm under right now? Am I kind of hyper reactive? Am I hypo reactive? Like, how am I engaging with the world? There's a tool we use in therapy that I'll probably leave you with, and it's probably one of the most powerful tools I think there is. And it's you become a curious observer of yourself. So instead of me going through life thinking everything's happening to me, why did that person hurt me? Why am I under all this stress? Like I'm the actor in the film. You start to zoom out and become the director of the film. So you become an observer. Like, why did that person push my buttons? Instead of why is this happening to me? Why am I finding this so stressful? What could I do differently next time? And I truly think as a human being, curiosity is our superpower. Like we are just being more and more removed from curiosity, more conditioned to think in a very sort of robotic autopilot way. Curiosity is the gift that makes us human. So get curious about it. Why am I finding life so hard right now? Why am I struggling to talk to that person? Maybe that's my gut instinct saying, don't trust that person, go and talk to someone else. Anyway, I could talk for days. But yes, curiosity is absolutely our superpower.
I think so. I've been through therapy, and that was the thing, the biggest takeaway for me. That was the thing that I think made the biggest difference is that I can experience something internal and then take a little step out. Oh, what's that? Not think, oh, this is me. Just think, oh, interesting. Why am I feeling that? Why am I experiencing that? Look, thank you both so much for this conversation. I've learned a lot. I'm incredibly selfish, actually. I just do these events for me so that I can develop. I really appreciate all of you guys that have come, especially you guys that have contributed in the chat. I think it's absolutely awesome. Thank you so much. If there is anything that you've enjoyed about this, or you have enjoyed it, if you could put that in the comments as well. What I do with those comments is I put them back into the emails when we do another event, and that helps to get a few more people registered on, so that we can kind of spread some of this good stuff. So anything that you enjoyed, you thought it was a good chat, and basically, I just want to thank you all. So thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Leanne, and thank you all for coming.